December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor awoke under a soft Hawaiian sun, its waters calm as glass. Aboard the USS Nevada, BB-36, the crew enjoyed a quiet Sunday. Mess decks filled with the smell of coffee and eggs. Letters home lay half-written, and boilers already hissed for routine drills that morning. It was this simple detail, steam in her boilers, that would set her apart from every other battleship on Battleship Row. At 7:55 a.m., the stillness broke. Engines roared from the sky as Japanese aircraft burst from the clouds like a metal storm. Sailors looked up, confused by the rising wine, until red suns flashed on the wings. The first bombs fell with a sound like tearing earth. Explosions erupted along Ford Island, and in seconds the entire harbor was a furnace. A torpedo slammed into Nevada's port side near Frame 40, flooding compartments and killing engineers below. But the engine crews did not flee. They sealed bulkheads, rebalanced pressure, and kept steam alive. Above them, men dragged ammunition to the guns through thickening smoke and burning oil. When the Arizona's magazine detonated, the shock wave rattled Nevada like a toy, splintering her wood decks and raining fire. Captain Francis W. Scanland rushed from his quarters, took in the scene, ships ablaze, men diving into flaming water, the air filled with ash. Only his ship still had power. He made a decision no manual could prepare for. "Get her underway," he ordered. Lines were cast off, anchor chains clanked through mud, and slowly the battleship moved. In the midst of chaos, a single vessel defied the enemy and began to move through fire. As Nevada crept past the burning wrecks of Arizona and West Virginia, her crew saw a harbor of horror, smoke rolling like night, ships collapsing into the sea. But men on shore stopped to cheer. Amid the disaster, one gray titan still moved. That sight caught the eyes of Japanese pilots overhead. They peeled away from their targets to finish the moving battleship. Dive bombers screamed down, releasing bombs that whistled through the air and erupted across her deck. One hit near the forward turret. Another smashed through the bridge, killing helmsmen instantly. Still, the guns kept firing. Ensign Joe Tossig, legs shattered by shrapnel, stayed at his post until he lost consciousness. Smoke turned the sun to blood. Oil fires spread along the harbor surface, their heat melting paint from the superstructure. Inside the engine rooms, the air was unbreathable, but machinists kept turning turbines, sweat pouring down their faces. Scanlan knew what had to be done. If Nevada sank in the channel, she'd block the fleet forever. He ordered her beached at Hospital Point. Bombs kept falling as the ship turned toward the shallows. One blast blew away lifeboats. Another ripped open the stern, and fires spread through the forward magazine. Yet the crew fought on. Hoses hissing, water pouring into flames that refused to die. At 8:45 a.m., Nevada's bow ground into the mud. her flag still flying. Around her lay the wrecks of a navy, but she remained upright, burned, bleeding, alive. The harbor was a graveyard, yet in that graveyard one ship still stood like a wounded lion roaring into smoke.
The attack finally ebbed, but Nevada was a floating inferno. Smoke poured from her funnels and blast-scarred ports, rolling low over the harbor. Her bow was buried in the mud of Hospital Point, but her stern still rose stubbornly above the flames. Inside, the world was steam, smoke, and darkness. Men fought blind, crawling through corridors half filled with water to seal bulkheads and keep the ship from capsizing. Electrical systems were gone, but flashlights and courage lit the way. The engine rooms boiled, pipes ruptured, and compartments filled with a sickening mix of fuel and seawater. Damage control crews worked bare-chested in the heat, faces smeared with oil, hands raw from handling red-hot steel. On deck, gunners kept their weapons ready for a third wave that never came. From shore, witnesses watched the monstrous shape of Nevada through a veil of black smoke and could hardly believe she was still afloat. At noon, the fires still raged. Every few minutes, an ammunition locker would explode, sending sparks and debris skyward. Sailors carried the wounded to the upper deck, where they were winched down into boots, heading for shore. The air reeked of burned paint, cordite, and diesel. Medics bandaged men with their own shirts, poured water over seared arms, and prayed the fires would not reach the magazines. By late afternoon, flames had consumed everything forward of the bridge. Yet the ship's spine held. Her keel, that iron heart, refused to bend. When night fell, her glow lit the harbor like a funeral pyre. The attackers were gone, but their destruction remained. A floating tomb surrounded by the wrecks of her sisters. And still the Nevada lived. Sailors aboard other ships spoke her name with awe that night, calling her the ghost that would not go under. When the fires finally died, the salvage crews came. Divers slipped into the oil-black water and vanished beneath the hull. They found whole sections torn open, steel plates peeled like paper, and corpses still at their stations. Each compartment was a memorial to duty performed without witness. By January 1942, patches were welded, pumps drained the bilges, and the great ship began to rise. Mud slid from her flanks as if she were drawing breath again. When the dry-docked cradles took her weight, the yard whistles blew, and men cheered through tears. 60 of their shipmates were gone, but Nevada was reborn. Months of labor followed, new guns, radar, and armor plates riveted over old wounds. Her great paint was replaced by a sea blue camouflage, and her guns were fitted with longer barrels to reach farther than before. When she sailed again in April 1943, veterans who had survived the attack stood at attention on deck, their faces hard as iron.
Across the Atlantic, she guarded convoys from U-boats, her guns thundering against the gray horizon. Then came June 6, 1944, D-Day. Off Utah Beach, Nevada's guns opened fire at dawn. 14-inch shells, the weight of cars, tore through German defenses. Each recoil was vengeance for Pearl Harbor. Smoke drifted across Normandy's sky as the battleship that had nearly died now led the charge of freedom. 2.5 years after being wrecked in the Pacific, she was back in battle, proof that steel can be mended and spirits cannot. After Normandy, Nevada turned her prow eastward for the Pacific once again. The veterans aboard felt the pull of unfinished war, the ghosts of Pearl Harbor calling them home. She passed through the Panama Canal in summer 1944, her battered plates gleaming under new paint, her decks filled with sailors half her age. They whispered stories of what she'd endured, touching the scars in her steel like relics of faith. When she joined the Pacific Fleet, the war had changed beyond recognition. The Japanese Empire was retreating, island by island, but every battle grew bloodier. Nevada arrived at Iwo Jima in February 1945, her great guns booming day and night in support of the Marines clawing up Mount Suribachi. From the deck, men watched the black sand beaches vanish under smoke, hearing distant shouts through the radio as shells thundered over their heads. For 5 days she hammered the island, silencing gun nests, flattening pillboxes, and tearing open bunkers. Each blast shook the sea like thunder rolling through the bones of the world. When the flag rose over Suribachi, cheers echoed from every ship, and some men on Nevada wept. But there was no rest. Orders came for Okinawa, the last and fiercest stand of the Pacific War. The sea there was alive with kamikazes, men who turned their planes into fire. On March 27, 1945, one struck near Nevada's gun turret, exploding in a storm of flame and steel. The blast killed 11 men and wounded dozens. Fires swept the deck, ammunition cooked off and shrapnel cut through everything. Yet the gunners kept firing. Damage control teams sealed burning compartments, dragged hoses through smoke, and smothered the flames before they reached the powder magazines. By sunset, she was wounded again, but still fighting. Her guns kept pounding Okinawa's cliffs until the end, each salvo defying the idea that this ship could ever be sunk. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, Nevada was still afloat, still armed, still ready. She had crossed 2 oceans, fought in 2 wars, and outlived ships decades younger. For her crew, the silence of peace felt unreal. She sailed back to the United States a legend, her decks scarred but proud, her name whispered with reverence. Yet her service was not over. In 1946, the Navy selected her for atomic bomb testing at Bikini Atoll, Operation Crossroads. She was painted bright orange to mark her as the target ship, a bullseye for a new age of warfare. The first bomb, Able, detonated high above her on July 1. The fireball turned the sky white, the shock wave flattening waves for miles. When the smoke cleared, Nevada was still there, burning but upright. Her superstructure glowed, her decks charred, but her hull refused to yield. The second test, Baker, came weeks later, an underwater explosion that heaved a mountain of radioactive water into the air. Ships around her capsized or vanished beneath the spray, but Nevada endured again. Scientists called her unsinkable. Sailors called her cursed. Even radiation could not destroy her outright. Months later, she was towed, glowing faintly with contamination, to Pearl Harbor for inspection. Attempts to clean her failed. The poison clung too deep. 2 years later, the Navy made its final decision. On July 31, 1948, aircraft and ships surrounded her off Hawaii and opened fire. Shell after shell struck her battered hull. Torpedoes ripped into her sides. Still she floated. It took hours and a direct hit to her magazine to finally send her beneath the waves. Even then, she went down slowly, as if reluctant to surrender. The Nevada did not die quietly. It simply went to rest. For decades, the sea kept it secret. The final resting place of the USS Nevada lay hidden in the deep Pacific, somewhere between Pearl Harbor and the open blue, beyond charts and memory. Veterans who had served on her aged and passed, their stories scattered across libraries and family albums, but the legend never vanished. Sailors spoke of her as the ship that had defied everything: torpedoes, bombs, fire, and even the atom itself. Then, in 2020, nearly 75 years after she slipped beneath the waves, ocean explorers from private research groups and the U.S. Navy joined forces to find her. Using autonomous submersibles in deep-sea sonar, they traced the seabed until a colossal silhouette emerged on their screens. There she was, upside down, resting more than 15,000 feet down, her guns still pointing toward a sky she would never see again. The paint of her atomic tests was still faintly visible, a ghostly orange amid the gray silt. Cameras drifted through open hatches, revealing corridors frozen in time. Brass fixtures gleamed beneath centuries of salt, and a tarred fragment of flagcloth stirred in the current. To those who watched from the research vessel above, it felt as if the ocean itself had saluted. The Nevada had finally been found, still whole in spirit, defiant even in death. Historians called her discovery a symbol of endurance, the closing of a story that began on a calm Sunday morning when the world caught fire. Today, the name Nevada stands for something larger than steel. Her story is taught not as tragedy, but as testimony to design, to discipline, and to the unbreakable will of those who served aboard her. In museums from Honolulu to Washington, fragments of her armor are displayed like relics of faith. Visitors read about the day she moved through flame while the harbor burned, the day she rose from the mud, the years she thundered across oceans, and the hour she stared down atomic fire. Every chapter of her life reads like a refusal to sink, to surrender, to vanish. Veterans who once served on her remembered the heat of her decks, the sound of her engines roaring under attack, the sight of her flag rising through smoke. Younger sailors learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving when everything burns. In 2020, when footage of her wreck spread across the world, people felt something deeper than nostalgia. They saw a mirror of endurance, proof that even the hardest blows cannot erase purpose. The USS Nevada was more than a battleship. She was a survivor of every era she touched. From Pearl Harbor's inferno to Bikini's radioactive storms, she carried the same heart. And though she sleeps now beneath miles of ocean, the legend endures, echoing through time, a reminder that some ships and some spirits are simply too strong to die. Long after her hull disappeared beneath the Pacific, the Nevada's spirit lived on through the men who had walked her decks. Many of them returned to the islands decades later, standing along the shores of Pearl Harbor, watching the calm water where they once fought for their lives. Some placed wreaths on the tide, others saluted in silence, eyes clouded with memory. They spoke softly about the ship that had refused to give up, how her boilers roared even as flames consumed her decks, how her gunners fired until their hands blistered, how she moved when all others stood still. Historians debated tactics, engineers marveled at her design, but the veterans remembered something deeper, the heartbeat of a ship that seemed alive. When the world fell into chaos, she became a symbol of defiance. Her story whispered to every new generation of sailors who learned that ships, like people, could possess souls. During the Cold War, as nuclear weapons multiplied and oceans filled with submarines, officers still referenced Nevada in naval lectures, the battleship that refused to sink. Her endurance became a lesson not of metal, but of mindset. That survival belongs to those who simply refuse to stop. Even as her wreck lay silent beneath 15,000 feet of water, the echoes of her engines seemed to pulse through history, reminding humanity that courage has a sound, the low, relentless thrum of steel refusing to break.